Sounds good.
And there he is. Oh, I'm so glad you were available. It's been way too long since we connected. I'm very happy to see you.
A long time.
We should do it. We should do it more regularly. I feel like right now, anyone who understands economics and finance, but especially shipping and trade and sports work, they are the epidemiologists of December 2019.
Yeah, this is our pandemic shock, I guess.
What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What is the panic like with you and all your finance bros?
So I think, I mean, aside from all the confusion and the chaos, right? The real concern is around whether or not this stuff sticks, whether or not these tariffs are permanent, whether or not they're used for revenue, whether or not they're used for negotiating tactics to get other countries to do what they want. So we're seeing this, incredible volatility in financial markets. Today we're up because Commerce Secretary Lutnick said on CNBC that we're close to a deal with one country. It's either India or Japan. We don't know which one it is. They wouldn't name it. And the baseline, according to one of my colleagues who's reporting out of Washington, is that the 10% tariffs stay, which would be a real drag on economic growth, certainly on imports, and it would affect our consumers, and it would affect our companies that import goods here and manufacture or assemble products, even cars. They're exempting this, they're exempting that. There's no rhyme or reason to any of this. There is no end game. And I think that's the part that has most of us completely flustered. When Treasury Secretary Bessent the other day was talking about strategic uncertainty, and the real term is strategic ambiguity, and you typically use it in geopolitical conflicts, not in trade negotiations. It's this level of this. Actually, let me rephrase that. It's a distinct lack of clarity as what it is that we're trying to achieve, and whether or not it will benefit the economy in any meaningful way. And there are opinions just completely scattered across the board with respect to all of it.
So coming back to where we're at right now, I mean, that was a longer term view of what could happen if this happens, if that happens. And it would seem to be fair, you don't think there's any strategy at all. This is basically Donald Trump's id acting out day by day, right? I mean, no economy.
Yeah, if I put my Freudian hat on, his superego is not at all in charge of this operation.
Right.
This is entirely too much id, and I think that what's crazy too is he's got this wildly misguided perception that the wealthiest period in U.S. history was from between 1870 and 1913, when we had one, no Federal Reserve, and two, no income tax, and we survived on tariffs. But it was, obviously a vastly different world. The country hadn't been fully settled yet. There were a whole host of things that, were remarkably different. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no technology we were starting to go through the Industrial Revolution, and we were starting to grow faster than Great Britain.
There were kids in fucking coal mines, though.
Well, yeah, there were kids in coal mines. There were, child labor violations of all kinds. So if you read, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, as early as the, 1900s, early 1900s, there were kids who were getting killed on the job. And there were all kinds of things that, just aren't applicable to today. And we, I guess, made revenue by, tariffing or putting import taxes on goods that came to the United States. This is a wildly different, far more complex economy. And I don't understand. It's like this almost childlike or childish belief, a romantic belief that some period in history was better than the period we're living in right now, which if you're born in America today, this is maybe the best time in all of recorded history to be a human being, given that everything is accessible and available to you, obviously with some drawbacks. But I don't think there's any real logic behind this. There's also a misguided desire to bring certain jobs back to the United States that most Americans simply
explain that. That's a misguided desire, you say, but there's a misunderstanding of history at best. There's a misrepresentation at worst, but it's all misguided because this idea that you're going to bringing back quote good jobs or whatever, steady jobs, secure work to America. I mean, on one hand, they're talking about the 80s and before. And on the other hand, we're hearing people predict there's going to be no jobs left because of AI. I mean,
and robots. Yeah.
somewhere in the middle, Ron. Why is that wrong? That we're not? Why can't we just build a bunch of factories and make it like the olden days?
Well, David Ricardo, who's a very famous economist, talked about the law of comparative advantage, right? So, not to get too far in the weeds on academic economics. Look, there's some things that we don't want to do anymore. We probably don't want to make T-shirts. We probably don't want to make textiles. We probably don't want millions of people putting pins into iPhones, and which is better done elsewhere at a much lower cost, so that we can get our iPhone for $1,000 instead of $3,000. On people who are sadly making $3 to $5 a day in other parts of the world,
Killing themselves because the job sucks so bad.
Yeah, and at one point, Commerce Secretary Lutnick said that's one of the jobs we'll be bringing back. And it's like, yeah, good luck getting anybody, to spend $85,000 a year on college for their kids so they can go put pins into iPhones. I mean, what we've been very good at is progressing to a service-oriented economy. What we've been very good at is being a consumption-driven economy, which is 70% of GDP. What we've been very good at is creating advanced technology jobs, even as we've shed manufacturing. Now, part of the middle class obviously has been hollowed out. Part of that's been the result of trade policy. Part of that was the result of misguided U.S. managers who ignored these, seminal developments in the global economy over the last 80 years that really changed things. The high price of oil allowed Japanese cars to come in here that were smaller, more fuel efficient, and had higher quality. A lot of things have gone into this. After World War II, we had about 50% of global GDP. Well, that's because Europe was offline, Japan was offline, there was no China, there was no Latin America. And so ultimately, over time, we were going to give some of that back no matter what. And so people have all these kind of weird, conflated views about where we stand right now. We're still close to 20% of global GDP with 5% of the world's population. So,
That's right.
It's still a good place to be. There are changes that need to be made, but they could have been done in a rational way that didn't alienate both allies and then also adversely affect adversaries in ways that we may not want to in the short and long run.
In the past, if you were reading a history book of American economic collapses or global collapses, you could look at from the Depression to the recession to the dot-com bubble, and it's kind of a myriad of causes. Sometimes it's more complex than others. Obviously, this one seems to be entirely, again, because of one man. And I mean that for two reasons. One, he had an amazing economy handed to him that Biden and the Democrats basically saved. All he had to do is hold on tight. It would have gotten better with very few changes probably. And he could have taken credit for it. Instead, no conservative economist, nobody on the right was advocating for this. There isn't really a conservative theory that would ever say remaking markets and trying to punish your friends and enemies and starting trade wars is a good idea. This is just him causing potentially a global financial crisis. Do you agree with that?
I'm going to flip it a little bit. It's not, I don't think it's a financial crisis because it's not rooted in the types of problems that we saw with the internet bubble or the great financial crisis, where they were banking crises, where you almost saw, entire systems go out of business. This may well end up being an economic crisis that is man-made. And it's Trump by himself being supported by people like Peter Navarro, his trade advisor, who is this a swearable show or not? I don't know.
Yeah, please. But it's like, go ahead.
Bat guano crazy. The guy's just a horrible economist. His stuff is not rooted in fact. And everybody who's supporting the president on this notion that we're going to bring back manufacturing jobs of some kind of the 1950s is just completely fallacious. I mean, we want high-paying, high-skilled manufacturing jobs. We want, smart people doing smart things and getting paid well for that. We don't want to go back to the 1950s. And by the way, when President Trump renegotiated NAFTA and with the U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade agreement, this was his agreement in 2018. We now have a fully integrated auto assembly village, if you will, that includes the United States, Canada, and Mexico. To try to tear that all apart and impose costs on the auto industry to bring everything back home from every little part that's made, or 85% domestic content, whatever it is they want. That is years in the making, and multi-billion-dollar investments that he won't even see the fruits of if even we're successful at doing it.
Are you making any predictions about the next few weeks? When I see pictures of empty ports and I hear people who are kind of experts on supply chain, just in terms of what's coming from China, I'm told nothing's coming.
Nothing's coming. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And I'm told that you can't just flip the switch back on. It takes 8 weeks to get a ship filled with, crates to America.
China, we haven't even started negotiating with China. I mean, the Chinese are denying that any talks have begun at all between Washington and Beijing. And the president said he talked to President Xi of China, and you're hearing that just didn't happen from the Chinese side. And again, like Seattle, the number of ships coming in, down. Los Angeles, that port, I think, is down 35% with respect to how many ships are coming in. And Treasury Secretary Bessent said, we don't think we're going to have an inventory problem because, U.S. companies prepared for this. Well, you don't prepare for Halloween, in February or March, right?
Well,
that's not the inventory you're pulling in. Small toy makers are not seeing anything come into the United States. So all these small businesses that don't have any leverage with the White House, who aren't getting any exemptions, are going to get crushed in this, certainly in the next several months, unless something material changes.
Well, I won't be a problem for me. I always wear the same costume, and I whittle toys for my girls every
year. Well, you like the 1870s then, right?
Yeah. I whittled a pipe for my daughter last
year. So you got her smoking tobacco and sitting out on the front porch,
Yeah. So what about the idea that prices are also going to continue to go up? That was what the election was all about, apparently. Right. Inflation hadn't gone down enough, even though it was on its way. And so what does this mean for prices? I mean, on everything, maybe everywhere from cars to groceries?
Well, certainly, potentially that's the case. I mean, we've got, as one of my colleagues reported today, and I think I mentioned this earlier, the baseline tariff is going to be 10% no matter what. And they think they're going to hold on to that. Now, and that's the result also of these conflicting messages about what the tariff is going to be used for. Is it going to be used to finance tax cuts? Is it going to be used to eliminate the income tax? Is it going to be used to negotiate with other countries to bring down their tariff rates? You can't do all those things simultaneously. What we do know from prior experience is that at the very least, it's a one-time price shock. Right. I mean, even companies like Shein and Temu, which are these Chinese companies that sell very, very cheap goods in the United States and compete with the likes of Amazon. I think I'm not sure which one it was. I think it was Shein that said they were going to raise their prices to 377% because of the tariffs. So, if you're buying a $2 T-shirt, it's going to be $6, and so there goes that. And that doesn't count what, if you're going to see a $5,000 to $10,000 increase in the price of a car. An economist I was on MSNBC with last night said that the average family, if these tariffs stay in place, even at the 10% baseline, will likely see $5,000 in increased costs per year, which, not a lot of families can afford.
I mean, everybody's going to see it, though. It feels like you're gonna, I need to start selling Trump did this stickers on my website or something, because
and put it on a hat, and because Trump 2028 hats are now selling apparently like hotcakes. So
he was just teasing, though.
You think?
I mean,
another distraction.
I think what's hardest for people in your profession and for any investor is that this man never does what he says and says what he's going to do. And he goes so back and forth. He vacillates on such important things that as we started talking here, you talked about, I mean, we've gotten such an important lesson on how markets go up and down minute to minute based on a comment from the president, his Treasury Secretary, the Fed chairman, and that gets put out on social media. We've also seen mistakes be made, things be misreported, and the market jumps up and down. It's crazy how unpredictable he is, and that's the only thing predictable about him. And that's terrible for the economy. It's terrible for business. It's terrible for investors. Fair to say?
Yeah, look, I mean, I hate using this expression because it's so incredibly overused that markets hate uncertainty, but so do businesses, so do individuals, right?
Yeah.
It's not just that markets are getting whipsawed here and going up and down with every tweet, every public statement, every utterance from anybody in the Trump administration. But when you inject this type of uncertainty, which really has a slightly longer tail than some of the other things we've dealt with in the past, businesses aren't going to make multi-billion-dollar investments wondering whether or not these tariffs are going to get rolled back and we go back to the status quo. And then all of a sudden they will have misallocated their resources. Consumers are going to hold off on purchases thinking that prices are going to go up, or they're going to buy it quicker and then not buy for a period of months. And so the planning at every stage of the economy, whether it's a consumer, whether it's a business, or whether it's other governments, and the amount of global trade that's undertaken is at a standstill. Like when you talk about China and the ship's not coming, or the ship's coming empty, this is a very big deal. This is not small stuff. There's some economists who suggest we could have a pandemic level supply shock if it persists.
I feel like those predictions, they seem fairly accurate. About what kind of work are you hedging on that? I mean, it seems pretty almost inevitable based on what's happening. I don't know. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just collecting information from what I'm reading. But I usually read a lot of credible people, and then I kind of put a consensus together in my own stupid little brain. But I feel like you're not too panicky, but that's also your face.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, look, I mean, there's the difference between my face and my stomach, right? I mean, I wake up every day and by 7:15 I have knots, and I'm sitting there and I'm either pissed or I'm upset, and I'm trying to figure out what's coming next. But I mean, the worst case scenario is that this persists for far longer than we can imagine, particularly with China. And we're locked in what the Treasury Secretary himself called basically an embargo, a trade embargo with China. That will have repercussions around the world. And look, we're not making friends with Canada. You heard the newly elected Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who, by the way, should not be trifled with. He is Harvard and Oxford educated. He was the head of the Bank of England. He was head of the Bank of Canada. He's no dummy. He's a real guy. And he's looking for other partners than the United States.
Did you hear? Did you ever hear a rumor reported that Mark Carney and the Canadian government quietly bought up like tons of Treasury debt, and then called the White House and were like, "You guys didn't know this, but we bought a bunch, and now we have leverage, and we're gonna put the cards. We're gonna call you to the mats." Did you hear that?
Yeah, I heard that rumor. Yeah. And look, I don't know what they have. So let's kind of go down the list. Like, so Japan has one.
Any solid reporting on it, just to be clear.
Yeah, same. I mean, I heard the story. I read a rumor about the story. Japan has $1.1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. China has $760 billion. Europe owns quite a bit. China probably owns more than $760 billion because they launder some of their purchases through Belgium and other countries, kind of shell companies. But at the margin, if Canada had amassed, let's say, $100 or $200 billion worth of treasuries and decided to dump them all at once, dollar would crash, interest rates would spike, and we'd have a real problem on our hands. And it might encourage others to do the same. In which case, if you get a run on the dollar and a surge in interest rates, that throws us into a very deep recession immediately. I mean, we're already struggling with, at least in terms of mortgage rates and auto loan rates, they're all pretty high relative to the recent past. And credit card delinquencies, home loan mortgage delinquencies are at levels normally associated with recessions. So any push in the wrong direction tips us over. So yeah, I mean, that could be a real thing. And that's, if he's really going to play that card, it would be self-defeating. We all know that move, no matter who does it, is mutually assured economic destruction. But given what we're doing, or what this administration is doing, someone might take the risk.
Yeah. Well, just another question about the health of the dollar as the world reserve currency. The things I've read about that are the scariest scenarios, that it could be under threat, and what that means. I don't really understand it. I don't want to understand it.
So you don't want me to explain it to you?
Do I need to? I mean, is it going to happen?
I mean, it's important because we borrow a lot of money, and we borrow in dollars. And in a lot of cases, other countries borrow in dollars. And if their currency should devalue, their debt servicing costs can double overnight, like we saw during the Asian currency crisis back in the late 1990s, or the Russian crisis in 1998, or the European debt crisis in 2011. When you're borrowing in dollars and your own currency weakens, the cost of servicing that debt can go up, can double, right, overnight, and throw you into recession, create inflation. We don't want the dollar to lose its reserve currency status because it's so integral to the underpinnings of the global economy. Foreign central banks hold dollars and they buy treasuries as the safest asset they can own. If that goes away, we lose an enormous amount of global power economically. And again, we also run the risk of this dollar flight that would wreck the U.S. economy.
Well, that sounds great.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun at parties to have this conversation.
That's funny. We're live on YouTube, and my friend Kim messaged, "Fancy Ron Insana waits until 7:15 for his stomach knots."
She must get up earlier than I do. I get up at 7. I read in because I have to get a couple radio reports done by 7:30 a.m. So as soon as I flick the computer on, I've made a cup of coffee. I look, I get sick, I do my radio reports, and then I stew for the rest of the day.
What did you make of the reporting that apparently is pretty well confirmed that Trump got word that Amazon was going to put a warning on price increases that they were due to tariffs? So Trump calls up Jeff Bezos, who's pretty good friends with, and Bezos is not going to follow through with it. I mean, I don't know what do you think about that?
Well, it's permeated all of business and to a certain extent the media as well. I mean, we're in the phase I would call premature capitulation, where everybody's giving up without a fight. And I don't understand it. They're worried about the legal status. They're worried about if they're going to do a deal, the FTC will block it. They're worried about getting sued by the Trump administration, having to spend time and resources fighting that for God knows what reason. I'm shocked at the lack of intestinal fortitude shown by businesses, law firms, and some universities, that they're not willing to stand up for the things that they believe in and immediately buckle. I've never seen this in my life.
How concerned are you? Last question, Ron. How concerned are you about the cuts to the federal government funding that NIH does for science and research? You could make a pretty easy argument that America is the richest country in the world because of our investments in our own scientific research and everything that we sell as a result, treatments, drugs, et cetera. But what do you make of these DOGE cuts, which, by the way, now there's some reporting, and I think it's probably going to turn out this way just based on the damage that it's done, the uncertainty that it creates, that they're going to cost, these cuts, the federal government will actually end up costing the taxpayer more money than they ever save because of the damage that they do. These investments that the federal government makes in the private sector, often you get a huge bang for the buck in any number of investments. So what do you make of all these federal government cuts and the damage that they are going to do, short-term, long-term, period?
I'm hoping it's short term, and I'm hoping that some of these funds have to be reinstated because they were congressionally appropriated, and the president does not have unilateral power to cut those funds, nor does Elon Musk, who's an unelected bureaucrat who hates unelected bureaucrats. The irony there is not lost on many of us, I think. Look, I am concerned, particularly in science and health, that those cuts are not only draconian, but they will have huge, downstream implications for our position in the world when it comes to science and technology. I mean, think of this, just nylon stockings. Where did they come from?
Nylon? What is the raw material? Is it, I don't know.
How did we end up making nylon stockings?
Parachutes
in World War II.
I was going to say, if you didn't interrupt me, I was going to say it was parachutes in World War II.
But so all the stuff that the government spends money on and invests in, whether it's, DARPA in the Defense Department, where they put a lot of money into companies that engage in, cybersecurity protections, all these different areas, healthcare, cancer research at the university level, which is being funded but now being taken away. That $2 billion plus that they're clawing back from Harvard, that's mostly medical research. And we are at the forefront of developing diagnostics, treatments, drugs, new technologies to detect diseases before they're fatal and can then be treated. When you start cutting all that stuff, the downstream is horrible. I mean, we already went through a period during COVID where life expectancy for Americans fell by 2 years, right? It's huge. And it was on an upswing that if you lived, for every year that you lived, you're basically adding another year of life expectancy at one point. And so this is truly horrifying. I mean, and I don't know how we get out of this, kind of, for lack of a better term, death spiral with respect to these funds. Congress needs to reassert its power of the purse and demand that the funds that go towards life-saving research, that go towards support for, and look, I mean, some people may view this as, some sort of kind of lefty type of sentiment, but the money that we use to support the poor, the young, and those who require an education to move ahead. There's some talk about cutting Head Start entirely, which has been one of the most successful government programs in educating and feeding poor children in the history of this country. Yep. It's just abominable that this stuff is being undertaken.
Yeah, the data on that is so well done and determines your success at age 18 if you had early childhood education, like a good Head Start program. Where should I go? Like, what should I buy right now? I'm going to go buy stuff. Do you go to, you should go to Costco, right? Like, I should always go to
Costco. Costco is a great deal because you can still get the $1.50 hot dog. That has not changed in price ever. And yeah, Costco is one of the best, most insulated companies from a price perspective through this tariff stuff, more so than any of the other big box retailers.
Why?
I think some of their sourcing is not entirely China related, and so they're somewhat more immune to this. But yeah, I mean, like, I think, Amazon now is not going to post the degree of pricing that's affected by tariffs, as you alluded to before. So you're going to see price hikes there, and you can figure out why on your own. It doesn't have to be sitting next to the price as to, why it went from $3 to $7. But look, I like Costco a lot. I've liked them as a company for a long time, and they do a phenomenal job. I don't think you punish a lot of U.S. retailers because of these things that are out of their control. What's really crazy is, imposing tariffs on countries that like export vanilla to the United States, which we can't possibly grow. We also can't grow coffee in the United States, and we're putting tariffs on coffee beans. I mean, this is just stupid. I mean, it makes no sense.
It's like things that people buy almost every day that you can't, and that people that are not political, that pay no attention. There's going to be like, my gas is way up, my coffee is way up. These are things that people often buy every day, a cup of coffee, or every few days. It's going to wake a lot of people up. They're paying attention.
Yeah, coffee will finally have a dual use, right? It's going to wake you up, and the price will wake you up as well. I mean, I think, look, if we get lucky, this is going to be one big bluff that gets a lot of kind of nonsensical deals that really don't move the needle, and they walk away, declare victory, depart the field, and we go back to worrying about how much the tax cuts are going to increase the national debt. More pedestrian, if you will, concerns, which in and of itself is going to be a problem down the road. But, if they're serious about this, and if they're serious about leaving the 10% tariffs on, and they're serious about punishing China, it's going to be a bit of a slog, and the market's going to swing crazy, and prices are going to go up, and we're going to have some sort of stagflation, slower growth, more inflation, and we're going to have to tough it out for a while.
In the chat, there's a question. Any idea why Trump's obsessed with tariffs? I heard a great theory, which makes the most sense to me. Not only did he learn about the tariffs, as you mentioned earlier, the McKinley and all that history, he's always talked about it throughout his career. He's talked about tariffs and the value of them. But I heard this theory that because he's such a selfish, self-interested, the putting out the tariffs mean all these countries have to come to him and ask him for something, and he gets to decide. He wants that. He wants everybody to come and beg him for whatever they want, whatever they need. That's why he's doing it to all the countries, and he can talk about it.
And companies, right? Because they're the ones who are asking for exemptions, then also have to bend the knee and say, listen, would you exempt us from these tariffs? Would you help us out? So then he's in the position of granting favors, right? So yeah, there's a weird psychological component there that I think is at least in part true. There is, though, this overriding, and I don't understand it. And I don't know. I mean, clearly, if he went to Wharton, this is not what he learned at Wharton Business School. That the period from 1870 to 1913 was the richest period in American history.
Right.
Household net worth is over $150 trillion. Among major countries in the world. We have the largest per capita GDP. We have the largest GDP period. We have a 4.2% unemployment rate. Yes, we have problems that need to be addressed. No doubt about it. This ain't the way to go about it.
You are the best. I hope you'll hold our hand and then eventually feed me by hand.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I got to see if my career holds up during this period. It's one of these weird things that God knows what happens during a recession.
My your wife would be like, Ron, is Pete going to stay here much longer?
Well, we do have a basement bedroom if you like. We call it what do we call it? Cloud 9, I believe, downstairs for guests that has its own.
Well, that's what I assumed you did, and that's where I will be. Thank you, buddy.
You're more than welcome to be there.
Very, very much.
Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you.
End the stream for everybody. Thanks everybody for watching.